Thank you everybody for joining our presentation today. Samir and I are really excited to have you all here. We think we've put together a good presentation, so hopefully it will be pretty beneficial to you all joining us today. To start off, we'll do some quick introductions and I'll go first. My name is Nicole Shores and I'm a customer success manager here at Ceros, working with some of our larger enterprise clients. I really am here to act as the day-to-day point person and advisor for all of my customers. And I'm really here to make sure that any company that's using Ceros is successful with it and to answer any questions as it relates to interactive. I'm excited to have Samir with me here today as well, and I'll let him introduce himself.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm Samir. I'm a producer here at Ceros with our professional service or pros team, as we call ourselves. I've been here at Ceros for over 3 years. I've worked across a variety of industries, from healthcare to financial services. I've actually worked really closely with helping to onboard new customers in the Ceros environment to help them pilot, launch, and eventually adopt the Ceros platform. And in addition to your customer success manager, Nicole, in this case, anytime you guys want to collaborate with any members of the pros team, I'll be your main point of contact getting started, and then we can continue to collaborate and build some awesome content going forward.
Yeah. So let's get right on into it today. So on the agenda, we'll be discussing our pros team and best practices they've uncovered before starting a new interactive experience in the studio. And on the agenda today, we'll review quickly who our pros team and what they are, what they do, how our pros team stays organized and the processes that they've found helpful and have put in place, project discovery, and what our team likes to consider before jumping into the studio, what types of tools our team uses to help with efficiencies and organization outside of the studio, and really any other considerations we found to be crucial in the interactive process. Before we move on, I do want to mention that as questions come up, please go ahead and drop those in the chat. We're going to try our hardest to get to those questions as we go along. If we have time at the end, then we'll get to any questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. And I do want to mention that today's webinar will be recorded, so we'll send out the recording and this presentation deck over to everybody who registered after the call. So first up, so most of our customers who are on the line today, I'm sure, are familiar with our pros team, have heard the word pros at one point or another in their partnership. But to make sure everybody's on the same page, Samir, can you please give us a quick review of who the pros are, what they do, and how they fit into the Ceros organization?
Absolutely. So we are the pros here at Ceros, a group of designers, strategists, UX folks, and just general content strategy type people. A group of experts, in-house experts that we have day in, day out working in the studio to create content, and they truly are the pros. They are experts in all things Ceros, and they're really a great resource to lean on as you start to create more and more content and scale out more content going forward. So obviously we're here to help create content, but we're also here to help educate and increase the adoption of you guys as customers within the Ceros platform. Now, on top of that, we also have a group of producers in-house as well, and project managers that can help coordinate the efforts of everyone on the pros team, along with being a main point of contact, along with your customer success manager, to execute on all things pros related.
Yeah, our pros team are truly filled with some really amazing and talented people. And I personally, as a customer success manager, I'm always going to them. I love picking their brains when it comes to anything interactive. So like to reiterate that if you're working with a launch account manager, a new business director, a customer success manager, or a account executive, if you have any questions, please let them know, because we have this really great support system behind us to ask questions to as well. Moving on, before getting right into the studio and starting the build of a project, what does our pros team do to help scale their processes and stay organized?
Sure. So like I mentioned, we have an in-house team of dedicated pros that work day in, day out in the studio. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of projects going on there. So in order to properly organize and scale that process, there's a few things that we think about internally as we start to create more and more and more projects. So first and foremost, we have different tools that we use. We'll go into some more details about those tools in a little bit, but really there's a few different types of tools that you can use to help track time, organize communication, organize assets that you already have, and a variety of other tasks that you have for creating these projects. On top of the tools, we have project managers and producers in-house that help use these tools along with all our designers and strategists. And the project managers are really the facilitator, and they help prevent any roadblocks or help smooth out any roadblocks for any project related issues that coming through. So really we like to, as project managers, as producers, we like to enable and empower the rest of our design team, the rest of our strategists to be able to create within the Ceros studio. But having a project manager there can really help coordinate that effort across the entire board. And lastly, I mentioned, we have lots of projects going on. On a yearly basis, the pros team tackles about 600 projects or so. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of tracking that needs to happen in order to keep all of those organized, and we can understand how we're actually approaching different projects for different industries. We can glean some analytics based on all this tracking, but really tracking those types of projects and the amount of projects over time really gives us some good insights as to how we can improve our process and scale that out more efficiently.
Yeah, this is a really great baseline for scaling processes with interactive. Moving on, in order for the pros team to scale their processes, what are some things to look for when starting a project?
Yeah, so one of the first things that we think about when starting a project is filling out some type of project brief. This project brief is really important because it's basically the starting point for any project. It really is a baseline and provides all the context for why, who, and what you're doing the project for. So if we go into the why quickly, why are you doing this project? It's probably one of the most important questions you can ask even before you start this process. So why are you doing this project? What types of objectives are you trying to achieve? And then how can you actually achieve those with this project? The who are you building this project for? Who is the audience for this particular project? That can really help cater what you're actually going to be building and how you're going to go about building that. As you can imagine, having some type of sales collateral, that audience is going to be vastly different from top of funnel marketing material that's going to be just sitting up organically on your website. Lastly, thinking about the overall campaign goals and the bigger picture for this project. How does this individual project fit into the larger picture of what you're trying to achieve from a larger marketing team or a larger internal team that you have? You obviously don't want to just do a one-off project. You want it to align with the future goals that your company has. So that means the project's going to be a little bit more valuable that way because it will align to those larger goals. So that's the brief. In addition to that, thinking through what assets you currently have in place. So you obviously have some branding in place already. Collecting those assets is a good starting point for any Ceros project. How are you going to be representing that brand within the Ceros environment? Any other digital assets do you have? Obviously, not everything is built in Ceros. You're going to have digital assets in other places. We understand that. Being able to access that, having your designers, your marketers being able to access all that material up front is really going to help you as you start to build out the experience. And then lastly, as far as assets go, thinking about any inspiration that you may have in advance. You can get a lot of different inspiration from anywhere on the internet, anywhere on print, anything that you have. It's going to help give you a good starting place or give you some good inspiration for how you want to continue to build out that project. So lastly, what we start to think about when we start any project are the stakeholders. Who is the project going to be for? Who's going to be reviewing these types of projects? Who's going to be providing feedback? And then ultimately, who needs to approve these projects? In different industries, there's different review requirements. So thinking maybe in the healthcare space, for instance, if something needs to go through a legal approval because it's in the pharma industry, for instance, you want to make sure that you're accounting for those types of approvals and review rounds up front before you even start the project. You don't want to be blindsided at the end of the project when you're ready to launch and then you realize that you actually have to change something. So thinking through what those review rounds and approval process is going to be up front is going to be a huge benefit as you continue to scale up that process.
Yeah, I agree. I think these are all really great steps to consider before getting started on a project. And I've personally firsthand seen these steps be super helpful in the beginning stages of a project. So moving on, just going back to briefs a little bit, I know most companies already have their own internal briefing system in place. However, a question I'm most commonly asked by customers is, how is an interactive brief different from what they might already have? And is there anything special to consider when it comes to an interactive project brief?
Yeah, so a brief is very, very important. It's a starting point of any project, whether that be within Ceros or outside of Ceros. We'll focus on the Ceros briefing here because you're thinking of how this particular project can fit into the larger picture. And that's really important because if you have different designers or different strategy folks come into the picture, you want to make sure that there's a place where they can find all that relevant information up front. They can collaborate and ideate on what the project will actually be. The brief puts all that in one spot so you can actually focus on the objectives of the project. And then obviously, defining those objectives, defining the goals up front is important. It actually helps whoever's creating that brief think about what those objectives are. And you may even get into a point where you're filling out the brief and you're like, well, this project doesn't make sense. So how do I actually align this project with our current goals and objectives?
Yeah. I do also want to mention that if any of our customers are interested in seeing the project brief that our pros team uses, please let your point of contact at Ceros know. We'd be happy to share it with you. It's not a secret and we love sharing it. Also, in terms of goals and objectives, we have a really great Educate article that goes over clearly defining your goals and objectives for your project. So definitely recommend checking that out as well. So now we've heard about how our team scales their processes and what's needed beforehand. Are there any tools that our pros team leverages to help stay organized? And if so, what types of tools are the team leveraging and how?
Yeah, sure. This is kind of where I'll put a little bit of my project management hat on for this type of thing. So first and foremost, thinking through, I mentioned earlier, we do about 600 projects a year. So what's really important is our asset organization. Organizing, branding, materials, iconography, fonts, all that stuff for all 600 projects can be somewhat of a nightmare if you're not organized and you don't have a consistent system that you use every time. So using something like a Google Drive or Box.com or Dropbox or whatever you want for a digital asset organization, basically what you want to think about with this asset organization is how do you consistently scale that out so that it can be used across every team member and they always know exactly where to find all these assets. So every time that we create a new project, we follow the same folder structure. We have a folder in it for client files. We have a folder in there for initial briefing files. We have content deck, copy deck folders. All that is organized in a consistent manner. So everyone knows exactly what, where, and how to find the assets that they need to continue to build out the project. So that's kind of the asset organization. We'll go into time management next. And time management is really important, especially as you start to split up the tasks for creating and executing on the actual project. There's a GIF here. This is of float.com. That's a good example of a project time management software. It allows you to assign tasks. It allows you to set tasks and the duration of the tasks. And one of the best things with time management software is that it allows you to track the progress of the project and track the time of the project. So you're going to get the actual cost of the project versus the estimated cost of the project. Got a question here. The app is called float.com. It's web-based, and we can drop that link in there as well. But it's a really simple software. We have all our resources. You can use all your resources on add all your resources to the platform, and then you can assign those tasks individually. And then as a project manager, time tracking is important because you're going to be, again, like I said, you're going to be able to see the actual versus estimated costs. And if you're continuing to track that time over the course of the year, you're actually going to see how much time you've spent on extra time added to projects, or if you're underestimating these projects, you actually want to be very similar. You really want to be very concise and consistent with the amount of time you're spending on your projects. So being able to track that over time is really key.
Yeah, I also do want to mention in regards to time management, I think this is a really great tool to be leveraging. And as a customer success manager, I want to call out, if you want to improve your efficiencies in the Ceros studio when you're building out those projects, start tracking that time now, start tracking how long it's taking you all to complete an experience, share those stats with your point of contact at Ceros, and we'll look at areas of improvement with you for the future. So really here to help out with that side of the partnership as well.
Cool. So lastly, and arguably most important, is communication. There's a lot of different project management softwares out there. There's tons of them. But making sure that you have a system in place to be able to communicate effectively amongst your team members, make sure everyone's included on the initial project, and then effectively communicating throughout the duration of that project. You can communicate via individual tasks. You can communicate different types of feedback back and forth. You can collaborate on, different ways to go about approaching the build for the actual project itself. There's a lot of different ways to track that communication and communicate with other team members, but making sure it's all in one place and that everyone knows how to use that and view that communication. We've all been in instances where we'll have feedback. We'll have too many cooks in the kitchen. We'll have feedback coming in from all different directions, and some of it's overlapping, some of it's kind of unorganized, and you're not sure what actually goes where, and that can lead to a lot of confusion and actually extend the duration of that project if you're not concise and clear with that communication. So having a place where it's all in one spot, you can see where everyone's communicating, you're not going to get that overlap, and you're going to be able to scale out creating content a lot faster if you have some type of software and not just relying on emails or one-off chat messages.
Yeah. And I also love the idea of leveraging tools to help with asset organization and communication. I believe both of those tools, those types of tools, are super helpful for empowering cross-team collaboration, which in turn will help with streamlining the interactive content creation process. So if you want to learn more about that as well, please reach out to us, send any questions you have in the chat, or let your point of contact at Ceros know. So moving on, so far we've reviewed how our team stays organized and efficient with the use of the project briefs, assets, and tools that they used to help stay organized with all of that. Are there any other things to consider before jumping into the studio and starting on the build of an experience? What else can really affect projects?
Yeah, I listed out a few things here, but most importantly, this GIF is my favorite GIF of all time, and I couldn't not put it in this presentation. It's really distracting. It's really distracting, I understand, but it's going to be there and it's going to stay there. So anyway, some other considerations. External stakeholders, like I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, that external stakeholders can be a huge factor in determining what could be happening and how you're going to get feedback throughout the course of the project. But thinking through what wildcards could be out there. Maybe you have a new CMO that's coming into the picture and they're not aware of what Ceros is quite yet, and you present this experience to them, and they want to change some things, and that's totally fine. But if you can account for having a little bit of flexibility in the schedule throughout the course of the project, you're going to give yourself a little more breathing room. You're going to not get stressed out because you have to hit a certain deadline, a certain launch. Just being able to account and applying a little bit of an agile process to that's going to help you become a little more flexible with those projects. I really want to double down on the thinking of the larger campaign. So how does your project fit into the bigger picture of what you're trying to do? You don't want to spend a lot of time on a project that doesn't really coordinate or coincide with your objectives. You want a meaningful project that's going to align to your overall marketing objectives or your sales goals or whatever you're creating the experience for. And lastly, I really want to touch on future proofing. And so future proofing is thinking about a project and how it's going to be used in the future by other teams, by other team members, how it's going to be used to iterate and create more experiences going forward. And then also thinking about how you're actually building within the studio itself. So thinking through, if I create one pop-up here and I have to copy it 40 times for the next experience, how can I make that in the most efficient way? You're going to realize if you've made all 40 copies right off the bat, and then you have to change all the imagery in each one of those pop-ups after you've duplicated them, that could be a little bit tedious. So you're going to save yourself a lot of headache if you think through the best way to produce it at scale right off the bat.
Yeah, love the idea and concept of future proofing. So helpful. And then one quick question before we move on, Samir. You've mentioned external stakeholders a few times. I know that is super important. What if those external stakeholders aren't familiar with Ceros, who we are, what we do, or Interactive as a whole? What do you suggest?
Yeah, first and foremost, reach out to your customer success manager, get an intro on the books, and kind of walk through what the process can look like as you start to intro Ceros. And then, once that's in place, then you can really start to introduce interactive design, why it's important, and hopefully grow that Ceros ecosystem internally on your side.
Yeah. To double down on what Samir just mentioned, if those external stakeholders are not familiar with Ceros, but they have a hand in giving feedback on the content that you're creating in Ceros, please let your point of contact at Ceros know, whether it be your launch account manager, your customer success manager, whoever it may be. We'd be happy to set up a call with them to review who Ceros is, what our platform does, and how interactive can be impactful with your organization. So moving on, so today we've discussed a lot, from understanding that mac and cheese ice cream just tastes like cheesecake ice cream. We've reviewed who the pros are, what they look for before getting started on a project, and tools that they use to help them stay organized. Can you walk us through your main takeaways overall?
Yes, sure. So starting off any project, we want to think about how we're actually briefing it. Who is the project for, why we're doing the project, and what the actual project is. Thinking about that up front is really key. And then also gathering all those assets up front. So whatever assets you may have already in play, it's really, especially as you create more and more content, it's really going to help you scale out the process of creating content using the Ceros platform. We talked a little bit about some different tools and maintaining organization and communication throughout the process of the individual project, as well as additional communication for additional projects going forward. That will also allow you to have some really good upfront communication and collaboration with the team. So I can't stress it enough, is getting everyone in the same room together so they're aware of what the actual project is before they jump into it. Bringing in a designer at that tail end of the project, you're going to have to re-explain the goals, the objectives of the project. But if they're there from the beginning, they're going to know exactly what the project is, and they're going to at least have the context, even if they're not really touching it right off the bat. And then, as always, reach out to your customer success manager with any questions, and we'll be able to answer them for you. And we got one question in here as well. Yeah, so how to decide if a project is a good fit for Ceros. We'll get to the future proofing one in a second as well. But if a project is a good fit for Ceros, it's really thinking through future proofing is important for that, because you're going to think through what the objectives of the individual project is and how they align to the larger picture. So let's take an objective of driving more leads to your company, right? And if you want to drive more leads to your company, you want to create some good top of funnel sales marketing tools, and you want to look at who the audience is of that particular project. If you look at who the audience is, you look at what your objectives are, then you can create a project to align with those objectives. If it doesn't align with those objectives, then you're going to have to rethink it, because it may not be the most useful time that you're going to be spending putting towards that project. Let's take the sales collateral, for example, again. If you're creating a random, top of funnel brand awareness piece, and it doesn't have any call to action within it, so it doesn't have anywhere for someone to drive to that lead, that it's going to be maybe not a worthwhile project, or you can tweak that project to make it more worthwhile. So maybe you're realizing that the content's just so dense and so much that no one's actually reading it, and then you can drive, and you're not being able to drive them to any particular CTA. So thinking about then consolidating content, driving them purposely to that CTA, and then reviewing that project after it's been released and after it's been live can really help determine whether the project's good. Your customer success manager can really help you dive into the analytics behind any experience that's already out there. We have a full in-house team of digital strategists. We do a lot of different webinars and strategy content and group sessions on analytics and things like that. So you can really take a look and take a kind of a deeper dive into, is this project relevant? And not that I'm saying that one project is going to be a bad experience, but being able to see the different takeaways that you have from those individual experiences as you start to scale this out, it's going to be really relevant.
Yeah, and like Samir mentioned, Ceros is truly unlike any other vendor you're working with. We really consider this a partnership. And with that, we have that full ecosystem of support, especially behind your main point of contact here at Ceros. So no matter what area of the journey you are in with this partnership, if you have questions, if a project makes sense for interactive or not, please ask us and we'd be happy to guide you in the right direction as well. Pull it inspiration that might be similar to that project to show you what other customers are doing, or to really help you strategize. So yeah, reach out to us as much as you'd like.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of future proofing, John had a question on, is there anything in Ceros like a master template that when changing anything within it, that change replicates on any copies of the master template? So there isn't anything exactly like that, but we've been doing a lot of work up front with branded content for different customers. And it's been taking the form of something that we call a stylescape. And that stylescape has been used as basically like a toolkit, a starting branded toolkit that can be used to copy and paste different types of elements to other experiences. And that way you're going to have that consistency that you're looking for across all content that you create. And in fact, this experience that you're looking at right now, we used a similar method. I was able to pull this together and piecemeal this together from our branded content that we have for our internal pros team. And it was actually really smooth. I'm not a designer, Nicole's not a designer, but we put together this probably the most amazing presentation that you guys have ever seen. So
we hope it was amazing. Also, to piggyback off of that, we did follow the steps that we gave you today. So Samir and I sat down, we identified a need for this presentation. We discussed our audience, our goals for this presentation, which helped us form the outline for this experience. And then, like Samir mentioned, we use templates because we are not designers, but we work with some really amazing designers. So that was always helpful. Just wanted to mention, if there are any questions, please go ahead and drop those in the chat. We have some time to get to them. And it looks like Peggy does have a question. Is there a video on organizing layers in Ceros? We have a lot of new designers using Ceros and it would be super helpful. I don't know if we have a video on that, but we do have a Ceros Educate article that reviews groups versus folders, which I have found helpful to kind of deep dive into organizing the layers panel. On top of that, if you want to set up a call with your point of contact at Ceros, would definitely recommend that. They'd be happy to walk through organizing that layers panel. And if you have some new designers at Ceros, we also have our basic level studio webinar that Caroline runs. We've had some previous recordings in our webinar page on Ceros Educate, or we also have those just sprinkled throughout as upcoming webinars.
Yeah, I was just browsing our Educate. We do have an article on using folders in Ceros, so we can link that too.
Yeah. Awesome. Any other questions from anybody today? Cool. Well, perfect. Will you be coming out with a GIF export option? That's a good question.
That's a good question. So there's always stuff in the product roadmap. There's nothing as far as a GIF export option right now. But I will say, as a kind of a third-party system, I personally use Giphy.com, Giphy Capture, to capture different animations happening in the Ceros studio. And then from there, we can actually create GIFs based on whatever's animating in the Ceros studio.
Yeah. Can we still register for that training? You definitely can. Please sign up. If you go to ceros.com/educate, you'll see our webinar tab, and that's where you can register for any of our upcoming webinars. Where can I see the interactive brief that you mentioned? So either your point of contact at Ceros can send that out to you, or maybe it's something that we can just include in the follow-up email with the recording today as well.
Yeah, we have a few different templates for briefing, and we're actually revamping some of our briefing process to make it a little bit more high level focused. So it's going to really align to those objectives that I was talking to earlier. So more to come on that. And then anytime you do start work with the pros team, that's kind of the first thing that we preach is to fill out that brief. So your customer success manager will send you that brief as you have the need for new projects, and then we can start to get the project kicked off from there.
Yeah. So we're getting a lot of questions now. Do you recommend wireframing in Ceros and building off that, or wireframing separately and moving to Ceros?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really depends on the type of project that you're doing, right? So the whole point here is that you are doing some type of wireframing. How you want to execute on that wireframing is completely up to you, and whatever fits your workflow the best is the most important way. What we've been doing a lot recently in creating new projects is we've actually been doing something called a concepting round. So we have this concepting round in place, and that concepting round does two things. One, it explores the look and feel of the experience within the Ceros environment. We build that directly in Ceros. I was mentioning stylescapes earlier. That's something that we do to explore the brand, especially if it's the first time we're working with any customer. And then on top of that, during that concepting phase is when we actually do start to think about the wireframing. And what we've been doing recently, just to keep it very low fidelity and focus on kind of the flexibility of the design itself, we've actually been wireframing directly on an iPad and kind of sketching it out first. Lots of times we'll bring that image into the Ceros studio, so that way we have that reference point at all times when we do start to build and create the assets for the actual experience. So in other cases, it may be appropriate to create a full high fidelity wireframe up front, especially if you're passing it to different designers, or it's a very complicated experience that you're trying to build. You really want to think about what goes into all elements of the UI of that experience. So it's a good question, and the most important answer I can give you is just make sure that you are doing some type of thought process before just jumping blindly into the studio. I know I've made that mistake before, and it's a little bit of a Frankenstein monster when I do actually create and execute on a project.
Something else that I found really helpful and have seen in practice with our customers is one of our senior UX designers, Hannah. She will do, I don't know what the name of it is, but she'll have everybody come together and draw out sticky notes what their ideas or concepts are for a project, or write out what their thoughts are. They'll put them on a whiteboard, and then everybody will vote on what they want to include, and then kind of put together an experience from those sticky notes. So it is very collaborative up front. Everybody's getting their thoughts and ideas out there, and then everybody's kind of coming together again to pick what they think will work best based on the goals they have for the piece. I believe Alexandra has run a couple, or Hannah has run a couple of webinars kind of going into that a little bit. So definitely check out those UX webinars hosted by Hannah. They're really, really great.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions before we go today? Okay, well, if you do have any questions, please send those our way. Send it to your point of contact at Ceros. We'd be happy to answer them. Thank you so much for everybody who attended today. We hope this was beneficial. We hope you learned something. And yeah, we were really excited to host this webinar and see you all today.
Yes, thanks, guys. It was really, really great to talk about all this stuff. Hope you have a nice weekend.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.